My do is always, and I've said this before, is like say what you're for. That's proven well for me, as opposed to saying what you're against. And this is usually around election time, whatever. You always say what you're for, and you'll get traction. If you start saying what you're against, then everybody's walls go up and da da da. On the don't is you can't make people better. Like we're on this delusion that we can do that. You can't, but you can inspire people to make themselves better, right? So through the course of this for today, I'm going to look for more do's and don'ts for just my personal habits. And one of the bigger ones is what are some good tips and tricks when I'm talking to make it sound like I'm not telling you what to do. I have this bad habit. I just kind of talk and it sounds like I'm so certain of my thing. I was like, no, I'm pontificating. I don't know crap. But it sounds like I'm saying this is the right way and you have to do it or you're bad. I'm like, whoa, I hear it in me and I don't want to sound it. So if you have any do's and don'ts on that, let me have them.
I have since you brought that up, I have a question I'd like to throw out to the group about a personal experience that would touch on your question, Dustin. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Kansas City for a family wedding, and it was my sister and brother-in-law, my fourth sister and brother-in-law, and he is a big Trump supporter. He was behind Trump before, from the get-go, and he's not real obnoxious about it, but he is, he likes to say whenever something comes up that dealing with cultural stuff, he says, well, I'm a conservative. And we were riding in the car, and I don't know how this came up, but he said, why does everybody get upset by the word nigger? That's just a word, it's just a word, nigger. Why does everybody get so upset about it? And of course, I could give him some reasons why, but I just bit my tongue, kept my mouth shut. But I can't help but think, I keep thinking, do I have an obligation as somebody I'm in relation with to try to address that, what he said? And I've been thinking, this happened like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I keep thinking about it, and I haven't done anything yet because I don't want to, like you, Dustin, I don't want to come off, like a liberal elite, and I don't want to come off like I don't have any respect for him or his opinions or whatever. And this is what I haven't done anything yet, and maybe I won't do anything. Maybe there's nothing I can say. But here were some things I was thinking about, and I'd just like to get your all's feedback about it. And maybe this would come under some do's, Dustin. One thing I was thinking about was, instead of writing him and telling him about my experience with racism and with race, and I would tell him a story. I would tell him stories about me, personal events, things that happened to me that probably had an impact on the way I feel about the racial problems in this country. And I wouldn't say, it would be stories and personal experience that shaped my attitude. And it wouldn't say, this is the way you should think. This is the way I think because of these experiences I had. And then my hope would be that he would not get real defensive, and when we see maybe there's another way of looking at this. I don't know. But to give you an example real quickly, I'll just go through these. One experience I would tell him about was when I was really young. We lived in the suburbs, but my grandparents owned an apartment building on First Street down towards the south end near U of L. And every couple of Saturdays, he would take one of us kids with him to help do cut the grass and trim the bushes and stuff. And, basically it was just my mother had 6 kids, and this was just a way of getting rid of one of them for a Saturday, So I was there one time, and I remember there were these older boys, and I was like about 9, I don't know, maybe they were like 11 or 12. And they they wanted me to climb up on this garage that opened onto the alley behind the apartment, and there was a plum tree that sort of covered you. And I grew up in this area. I grew up next door to this apartment and until I was 5 years old. Then I moved to the suburbs. But anyway, I never in my life, I knew there were people living in the alley behind it, and I knew they were Black people, but I'd never in my life, it was a 6-foot high cinder block fence. And I'd never in my life looked over that, seen that fence. But so these boys said, come on, you got to see this. It's really funny. And so we climbed up this plum tree, and we're sitting, and there's this old Black man. First of all, there's shacks. They're like clapboard houses with no paint on them, falling down, etc. It was like a Black ghetto right behind us. And I never knew it was there. And so first of all, I was shocked to see that. And then there was this old Black guy. He was drunk, and his wife was chasing him with a broom and stuff. And they just thought this was hilarious. And they were laughing. And this is awful. Yeah, I was like 9 years old, but it just didn't seem right to me, but I didn't say anything because, they were the big kids. Anyway, so I would tell him that story. And then the other thing I would tell him, there was a poem by, it's not Lawrence Dunbar. Anyway, there's a poem. It's a really great poem. And I shouldn't paraphrase it, but basically it's a little boy, and he goes to the big city, and he's really excited to see everything. And then he's right along, and he sees another boy, and he smiles at him, and the other boy sticks his tongue out at him and says, nigger. And he says, of all the wonderful things that I saw, that's the only thing I remember about going. It's a very effective poem, and I'll have to share it with you all. And I would say this poem had an impact on me. And then, I don't know, a few more things, but is that the way to, but should to approach it that way, is there I really don't want to, I guess I would like to have an effect, but I don't want to do something that's futile, and I don't want to do something that, so what do you all think about that approach? Just say this is why. And I would say, of course, the word nigger doesn't mean anything to us because we didn't grow up out of a tradition of Jim Crow and slavery, et cetera, and we were never dehumanized with that word. But I don't, to say that would be kind of preachy and kind of saying, I know more than you do about this word, and why can't you think about these people and be more empathic, So what, I don't know.
And a quick clarification for everybody. I know we didn't grow up, of course, we didn't grow up Black. Did anybody grow up where that word was normalized?
Oh, yeah.
Assuming we all grew up, yeah.
My uncle had a great,
it was bad.
My uncle had a great, one time we were watching a basketball game, and it was, I think it was, when more Blacks started playing. He used to not in college ball. And he said, hey, keep your niggers off our colored boys. And he thought that was really funny. The Black guys on our team are colored boys. The other Black guys are niggers.
Yeah.
And I used to cringe. He said, oh, and he thought it was so good. He would keep telling that anyway. So yeah, we grew up, Jews, niggers, it was the whole bit, all the prejudices that make America great, I grew up with.
All right.
I'm sure you never heard it.
Early on in a movie, Glory, I don't remember, with Matthew Broderick and Denzel Washington, was they define that Black versus nigger. There was the pejorative, you mean you're acting in a bad way kind of thing. And like I was defined that when I was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, should I bother, and would that be an effective response? Because he says things like, they were really appreciative it came, and he told me that he loved me, and he's not hostile. He doesn't feel hostile towards me, even though he knows that I'm liberal, I'm politically. So I don't know. I guess part of it, I don't really know if I want to get into a deeper relationship with him, because I don't have to see him every day. So am I crusading? Do I raise the banner and crusade to try to convert one guy from his stupid thinking, or
well, yeah, is he define it in terms of wrongness? So there's 2 points here: wrongness and what you're for. Like, it sounds to me he's not doing anything wrong. And like he's not intentionally doing anything wrong. There's something he's unaware of that you think is wrong.
Yeah.
And then how would you define it and what you're for? How do you turn that into a positive thing? Because the biggest thing is listening to him. Because if you feel like you're not listening, then eventually you're going to turn into a Nazi. I don't care who you are. I'm being over dramatic to make a point. So yeah, what would you be for? What is the positive way to describe white people not using that word?
Well, my approach was, this is my experience, and the implication is this is why I see it differently than you do. And it's not because you're right or wrong, it's because I had these experiences and made me more sensitive. Yeah, please, David.
Please.
First of all, I want to say to Dustin, it's amazing because what you said about approaching things from the positive, I am working on that deeply in an arena that I hope I can get a few minutes to tell you about. It's a current, almost a crisis in my life and what I'm dealing with. But some other things first. What you said about being positive and structuring, even though it's negative what you're really saying and thinking and feeling, if you structure it so it's a positive, what you want to see happen rather than what is happening or the behavior, it's sometimes very difficult to do, as you know. But thank you for saying that, because that was on my mind. Which Stan, first of all, it's County Cullen is the name of the poet
I'm glad
who
you
wrote
remember
that remarkable little poem. So I want to share that with you right now. Sometimes being an English major helps.
Yeah, believe it or not, I just looked it up a couple of weeks ago. I just have it.
Here's my belief, though, an answer really to Stan and this dilemma is, first of all, think of the worst thing that anybody could say to you as an insult, demeaning, put down, crush you. Now, you may say, well, nobody who would say that to me I know, and so anybody who would say that to me, I'd simply reject them and it wouldn't bother me in my soul. But think of the worst, and that's the word nigger. I think that's what it's grown to become in terms of the worst insult you can possibly give to a Black person. Okay. I think I've said this before, I believe this is my job as a white, liberal, open-minded, wanting to see all this heal. It's my job, like you, Stan, to go to these various people, like your friend. I've got one too. And
your brother-in-law. Friend is a little strong word. But.
Yeah, I've got about 3 or 4 people I meet with who are very conservative. My job as a white person is, one, to listen and learn from Black people of all kinds, blend it in, make it a part of me, who I am, and how I carry that on with other people. So I'm a learner in that sense. I'm listening to Black folks talk about their experiences and what they believe needs to be done, all of that swimming around. And there's tons of complex opinions out there among Black people too. So you go to them and you be a model, and you say it as positively, Dustin, as you can, but you try to explain, and I've had some success in doing this, why Black people feel so crushed, why we have to kind of get our apologies, our reparations, and all the rest of it in order. That's our job as white people. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because, although I'd like to go into this other personal
I'm a little bothered by the idea of explaining, because then you get in the role of teacher and authority, and I'm telling you what's what.
Right.
And that's why I was thinking the better strategy is to go. I'm not saying the better strategy is to go. These are some experiences that I had that kind of make me look at that word differently than you do. And I'm not saying, because I think as soon as I start Well, don't you realize that they,
Yeah,
you know, there was.
it gets in that way. I was you.
I don't, you know, what are they going to say? Well, yeah, but it's not like that today. It's a lot better today. And you can't tell me that blacks aren't, and so that's what you get. You get you get a resistance, you get a simplified notion that justifies them not having to think about that stuff.
Right.
That's why I was thinking about the strategy of this is my personal experience that makes me feel this way. And maybe if the strategy is if he could see it as just me, my experience, not me as an expert or an authority or a woke person trying to tell him what's what, If
you talk about it in terms of how you're dealing with it and also actively listening how he's dealing with it, the end most rational seemingly thing, and you guys were both on it, was the best thing for him to do is ask that question of a black person. Don't ask the white guy. Just have the best response is like, here's how I'm dealing through it. Do you know any black people you can feel comfortable asking? And it's not enough, but it's the best path, in my opinion. But back to the whole thing, like I always have both sides of this issues too. I'm thinking, well, let's devalue the word. If we just start using it, then it loses its power or whatever. And I keep forgetting my job as representing the white ruling class is to I avoid that word altogether. Let black people empower themselves with whatever direction they want to use that word in. My job is to get out of the way.
I'd like to see this.
For my part, Stan, I'm sorry that I didn't address that because I think you're absolutely right. Dustin's right. But that's part of how you're dealing with people who don't believe like you do. So the example, your own experiences, and I'm not saying go in and preach. I'm saying what I meant to say is you bring it in as what you're thinking, what you're feeling, but you explaining in that way for me. And I've had some success in this, the bigger picture, all wrapped up in what you guys are doing and what I was saying that sounded a little more directive and so on. Wanted to clarify that.
So do you think I should, what do you think I should write him and address this? I let it go at the time.
It feels important to you.
Confrontational, but
I would think of it this way, that not just on this topic, but on any topic, someone does something or says something you don't agree with. You can approach your response from a vehement opposition, or as Dustin was saying what you believe. So for instance, let me turn the tables on this. I'm in a group where people want to start the meeting with a prayer. Now, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't want to do that. So I don't want to stand up in a meeting and cause a scene and get in their face and tell them what I think of that. But I feel like I have to express that, I don't do that. So you'll excuse me as I don't participate in this, that I really don't want to join in your prayer.
You have to say that? Can't you just sit there and keep your mouth shut?
Well, you can, but then they never know. They assume.
Oh, what?
Well, they assume you're going along with it. So now let's all.
You don't know what they're assuming.
Right. So
if somebody says,
you're worried about them thinking you might be a prayer.
No,
oh my God, Michael prays. Oh,
if I'm in a group and someone says, let's all join hands and say in a prayer, they're assuming that I'm going along with that. Well, I'm not. Yeah. So I don't have to be nasty about it. I just say, I really don't do that. Yeah. And let them know. I mean, I don't want to confront them. I just want to say, no, I can't do it. So in your case, you might not find an objection to that word, but I do. Please don't use that word around me. All right. Don't say it around me, because if you'd like to know more, I'd be glad to explain it, but just don't do that. The way you would say if they were saying it around young children, it's okay for you to have your own thoughts and opinions, but please don't express them here, because there are people who don't agree with that. You have to respect other people's opinions. So it's smoking. All right. You want to smoke? Okay. Don't smoke in the car. Don't smoke in my house, because that affects me. don't presume upon me. So if someone's using the term, this applies not only to interracial things, but gender issues as well. You know, somebody wants to tell you a story that's demeaning to women. Do you just sit and laugh and not say anything? Or do you say, you know, I really don't like to hear that? You don't, all you have to do is, you know, I don't want to hear it. They'll get the message, you know, but I agree with you, Stan. You don't want to preach to him and say, I'm a holier than thou, and I'll tell you what the right thing to do. No, it's like, no, I don't like this. So please don't do it when you're with me.
And I asked Tom, I haven't heard from Tom yet.
From Tom?
Paul.
From Tom. Who is this Tom?
You got Dave. You put it. Paul, what do you think?
Paul.
Well, I haven't, my responses is if they're a little more complex, because I would say to him, I'll tell my daughter you said that, and she'll come over and punch your lights out because she doesn't like to be called that. And you want to ask black people, that's here you are. You know, she gets pretty obsessive, you know, because I decided I wanted to reread Huckleberry Finn. Okay, because I liked that as a kid. It was a great little adventure novel of, you know, Tom Sawyer and Nigger Jim. Of course, Nigger Jim is all
beautiful book.
He's the hero of the book.
It's a great book.
Yeah, and I was thinking, you know, I wonder how she'll react to this, you know. Which, you know, she gritted her teeth. That's when she said, well, you know, if they come around with me like that, I'll, you know, punch their lights out, which she very well would. And so, you know, I said, well, you know, this is one of those great books, and I just want you to know this. I'm asking you this because this is what I grew up reading. You know, this and that particular book, and of course, it's one of those that, and she does not. I'm sure she doesn't really grasp at this point in her life because she's got other stuff on her mind. That, you know, this is, and the reason that this book is really about why people shouldn't use that term and so on. I mean, the whole notion behind that book being not about putting down this black man and is helping this young boy getting by. Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at. I always just have I don't hear that very much, especially if I'm anywhere around my daughter.
Yeah. So the interesting, the thing about Huckleberry Finn is he comes out of a culture where it's just accepted that this is the attitude towards black people and this is what we, et cetera, et cetera. But yet he, through his experience of being with this guy and all of these circumstances and conflicts and things that he learned, he starts to see him not as a concept, but as a real individual human being. That's the beauty of that book. It's through personal experience. You overcome your cultural assumptions and your cultural conditioning, and you see someone not as this or that, but as another human being like you. That to me is the beauty of that book anyway. And that would be, I mean, I'm living in East Atlanta now, and I'm in a minority. 60% of the population here are black. Yeah. And it's been great. It's for me in terms of really over confronting some of my deep, dark, unconscious assumptions that I grew up with, and kind of being able to purge those from myself and starting to see I do see color. I'm not going to say I don't, but I'm seeing less and less of it. And I'm interacting with people as people. And it's great. It's great. We play pickleball at the Y, and about half the people who play pickleball with are black people. And we just, we're just people playing pickleball and complaining about our aches and pains because we're too old to play pickleball. But it's just, I don't know. Anyway.
Hey, Stan, yeah. There's a guy, he's a professor of Black Studies, et cetera, at U of L named Ricky Jones, Professor Ricky Jones, one of the smartest people I've ever heard from. He's very, very radical. He said in a conversation, I happen to have a senator, a black senator, a long time. He's more of a kind of get along with everybody, but he hosts this guy, and the guy writes for our paper and so on. Those of you, several of you here local, I'm sure heard of him. He said, I don't have much hope for Louisville conquering its racial problems anytime soon, maybe a generation or two. And he said, I'm from Atlanta. And he said, back there, 60% black compared to paper today said we have 14% black in Louisville. He says, I don't have much hope for Louisville, Metro Louisville, solving its problems. It's not a big enough group yet. But Atlanta, he said, I'm thinking about moving back there because I think we can conquer racism in Atlanta by doing the very thing you've been talking about.
Yeah.
Dustin, you can speak to Chicago, perhaps. What's going on there. But I wanted to say that.
Yeah. Well, one other factor I think here in Atlanta is that you don't have amongst African Americans in Atlanta, you don't have the class disadvantages. There's two historic black colleges here, and many, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of black people that I meet are college educated, and they're working, they're not working in service jobs. They're not landscapers and grocery clerks. They're working in professional fields. And I think they have I don't think they have a chip on their, class wise, there's more middle upper class black people here than you would see in some other cities. I think and it might have something to do with the numbers too. I don't know. But
well, it also is exactly what you say, but it's also the more you have, if you're starting to slide into a majority and they're already there, you say, then you have to start dealing with it. You have to say, wow, this is a roller coaster, steamroller experience. And I better get in line. I better start. I'm trying to understand because, so, I think Ricky Jones has a wonderful point there. And thank you for your inputs.
Ricky Jones. Is that the person's name?
Dr. Ricky, R-I-C-K.
Jones.
Y. Jones. Yeah.
Is he,
he's a U of L professor. He's the head of Black Studies and Black. I don't know. It's more elaborate than that, and he's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, check him out. Thanks. So I've dominated the discussion here. I'll shut up and let you. Thank you for your suggestions and your ideas.
Yeah. Well, Stan, you were asking, should you speak up in occasions like that? And I feel compelled to speak up because, as Dustin and Paul certainly know, and I think I've mentioned to the rest of you, I have a different perspective on this. I am not representing the white population. In fact, I'm not white. I don't believe in white and black. I think that's a big mistake. I don't know when we're ever going to get over this idea that there are two separate races. It's not true. It's just false. And every time I feel like we're getting to the point where we get, as you were saying, Stan, or you get involved in folks and you forget about the color difference, somebody comes back and wants to remind you of that. I mentioned during the Supreme Court confirmation that I'm interested in how qualified this person is as a judge. That's what's important. I don't care otherwise. I don't care if it's male, female, white, black, green. It really doesn't matter to me. What I want to focus on is what their role is and what their responsibilities are, and are they qualified for it? And I think it's a mistake. I think the whole culture now is making a big mistake by constantly reminding us of this separation. You can't do anything without being reminded, oh yeah, this is black and this is white, black and white all the time. We never just give it up and start thinking about it otherwise. Dave, the experience I had similar to Stan's was when I was at the reformatory. If you're at the reformatory and somebody asks you, who was that in here? And you said, oh, he was a black guy. Well, that didn't mean anything. Right? There's so many, it no longer, it's no longer the method of identification. You would identify him as the tall guy or the old guy, perhaps. But, saying black, that didn't mean anything. And I want to see us get to the point where we don't do that. So I try not to make the distinction. I try not to, this is my friend. It's not my black friend.
The concept of blackness and whiteness was invented
Right.
to justify and reinforce racism and to establish the idea that we are superior and they are inferior, and we're going to keep reminding them of that by
well, that's it's exactly what I'm saying is I don't want to, and I don't want to keep reminding myself.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I think, the whole Supreme Court thing, when those guys were going after her and her sentencing stuff, that was just dog whistles. This is a black, this nigger, she's just going to let the people get away with anything because that's the way those people are. That's what they were saying. And so many, but tried to put it, in a more respectable way. But anyway,
that was an interesting thing because it's again another positive flip on it is you're not going to stop people from mentioning it by mentioning it.
Right.
You just blow past it and just present yourself as a more attractive option by only talking about what do you call them? Trust acts in the Supreme Court. And they say, well, I want a black person. Well, I want an antitrust, blah, 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 blah. And you be that guy and you never stop. And you'll lose 99% of the time. But 1%, this whole, you can't make people better. Stop trying.
I think the reason black and white is we're not getting rid of is because we haven't gotten rid of racism.
Yeah. Well, then you will get rid of power. If you can do it by power,
people are going to keep thinking in terms of consciously or unconsciously of black and white.
Solidarity, support your Amazon union. I was learning about Bacon's Rebellion, and this was when the English in this country really formalized racism and really kicked it off because it was always around in various forms or whatever. But all the different races said, hey, you're in another continent, fuck you. And they're like, no. We're going to come back and make sure you think black people are this way and the Indians are this way. So you never threaten our bank accounts again. Now we have a chance to have solidarity with Amazon workers. And yes, you have to hug a Trump voter. Sorry, solidarity with workers. And then the power structure realigns. And then it's not about black and white. Stop racism by how it started. It was about money.
Yeah.
Well, just imagine a couple of things. Imagine we're recently at the Academy Awards. Will Smith goes up and smacks Chris Rock on his face. Now imagine if that had been Tom Cruise instead of Will Smith. Then it would have been a black-white issue, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. It was just a dumbass. He was just a dumbass. The fact that he was black had nothing to do with it.
Imagine if it was a poor person slapping Chris Rock.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Whenever there is a situation, we want to call our first attention to that separation. I'm for saying let's not make that the first go-to distinction. That there are other things that are more distinctive than that. Certainly Clarence Thomas doesn't represent my image of the oppressed black person. So there are so many exceptions, but I think we continue to propagate it by making that the first order of distinction. And that's all.
I think Mike and Stan are both right. Mike, leading with as best we can, just disappearing color from our vision, our hearing, our minds, really.
Your part.
Emotions are at the core of it. But Stan is even more right, I think, if that's exactly what you're saying.
You don't know me very well.
In that, if you get into denial, see, the way to bury the issue is don't ever talk about it, don't ever think about it, pretend that it isn't there, pretend it isn't there. We've done that for a century or two, or, well, maybe not that long, but think of the last 20, 30, 40 years. We pretended, and I think you're wrong about the reformatory too. Black and white were big issues. Now, I realized more when I came there, way ahead of you. But right up to the end, what's the quickest way to describe which inmate might be? Tall, black, short, white. Those things are so deeply embedded and they're easy to visualize. So when you got guards wanting to know who did what, where they're going, that is a key, and we all use it. We can't pretend that we don't, that isn't buried in there. And I think every one of us are deep down, it's our lizard brain reactions to how we were raised, Stan, I had almost the same experience with across the fence with black boys. Never got to know them because we couldn't play together. We could toss a ball back and forth in Cedar Rapids, which had, maybe 20 black families. It's, we're all on a journey to straighten out our pasts, understand where we went wrong. But, when I walk in, here's a true confession. When I walk into a big public restroom and there's mostly white, one or two blacks, I don't react at all. Here we are. If I walk into a restroom like that, wherever it is, and there's 3/4 blacks and maybe a couple of 3 white guys in there, my lizard brain says, whoa, is this a potential? I can't help that. All I can do is say, well, fuck this. I've got to go in there. This is nonsense. I've got to overcome it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
I understand. Yeah, it's I think in my case, I'm assuming, I grew up in a culture where black and white was a reality. People thought that way, and I guess my sense is that I have these. You just don't escape that cultural conditioning by just saying, no, I don't believe that, because it's still there. It's part of your conscience. I'll give you an example. If I'm walking down the street late at night and there's a black guy coming towards me, even if it's right here in good old East Atlanta, I'm probably going to walk across the street, especially if he's got a hoodie on and looking, because even though if I said hi, he would probably smile and say hi to me, but my instinct, my subconscious, my primitive brain, as you say, says, you better be the other side of the street because this could be trouble.
Yeah. You have to put in as much effort reconditioning yourself as
reconditioning. That's
someone put in.
That's a matter of consciousness. And to say there is no black and white to me is kind of, I agree in theory. I agree in, conceptually, but to say that is to deny that whole history of growing up in a culture where.
How do people of African descent distinguish one another?
They do. They talk about skin color. They talk about
shape. Sure, they do. But they don't say, universally, who was it? They're not going to say, well, he was black, because it doesn't mean anything. They're going to say he's that light-skinned guy or he's that dark-skinned guy. Yeah. So it's just the reduction to the binary choice that I'm objecting to. I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I'm not saying that, I'm unaware of this or I'm trying to ignore it. What I'm saying is if you keep reinforcing it, you keep the thing alive. Dave, I happen to know something about you that you would have been discriminated against when I was in school. You're left-handed, right? Left-handed kids were ostracized. Boy, left-handed, you had to correct that because of that trait. That was the stupidest thing ever. We don't do that anymore. Why? Well, people decided, well, that's a distinction without a difference. It doesn't make sense to do that. I want skin color to go into that same trash heap of history. And,
of course.
That's
what we want.
Right. And the way
there's a lot of things haven't changed with left-handedness. Once you're in it, you can't imagine the number of things I've experienced where it's built for right-handers, it's not built for, but you learn to deal with it, and it's not, it hasn't. it hasn't shrunk my image of myself,
Right.
really. It's not
No.
that kind of discrimination.
Right.
Catholic, when I was a Vista volunteer, we were living in the tower. We went, a guard there took us into town to Eminence from the reformatory
Eminence.
to go around. And we actually went in and we drank a beer there in Eminence, Kentucky, mostly a white town and so on. We went back and then he said, let's do this again next week. Then he found out that I'm Roman Catholic. He's a deep Baptist. And he said, I'm sorry, Dave is not invited next week because I don't cater to or associate with Catholics. You other Vista volunteers, be happy to take you, but Dave's out. Now that is discrimination of a different kind that Catholics have experienced, as well as Jews and so on. It depends on your audience. We know that the WASPs invented and populated and run this country, right up to FDR reminding his secretary, who was it, the Jewish guy, when he came in and said, please help, please let that, I think it was the ship that was trying to land. It was also the intervention, and Franklin D., and this is a historical, I can get you the name of the historian who recorded this. It's in that Jewish secretary's notes and so on. Franklin D. called them in and said, a couple of them, said, don't you come in here and presume to think that you can run or direct anything that we do, said FDR directly to them. He said, it's white Protestants, Anglos who developed this country, set this country up. This is our country. And we suffer, we allow, we say, you're welcome to join us here, you Jews, you Catholics, you whatevers, but don't think you can come in here and say that that we're going to listen to you. Even at that point, as revered as FDR is, that is historical fact.
Yeah.
This is so deep in our culture that we've got to work at, we've got to be confronting it or at least exposing ourselves to it, is my contention.
Yeah. I guess you got, I think you have to be aware, black, white is an artificial distinction. It's not real, but at the same time, it to many people it is. And while I just can't assume because I think this way that other people are going to think this way too. And I have to be aware of both, I think you have to be, and from my own personal experience, to be honest with myself, I have to be aware of my own prejudices because they're there. They're, I think the only way you can overcome prejudice is to be continually conscious of it. And to be continually conscious of it is to be continually conscious of, well, I think I've been taught to think this about black people, and I've been taught to think this about white people. And
yeah, you're right, Stan. And one sample is, a lot of this we're imagining rather than knowing what it's all about. Right. Michael, I think our experiences as the reformatory, certainly it was a life-changing experience for me. We were actually in a mixed group. There were probably 35% or 40% of those inmates were black. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, is immersing in that and starting to change my own thinking, my attitudes, understandings, and even in the early days when they were totally segregated there, the 3 black dorms were the other side of the tracks, as far away from the services as you could get. I think always thought it was fortunate as a symbol, as a metaphor, is that the schools were also on the wrong side of the tracks. I don't know whether you've ever thought about that, but there we were, and it was luck that it was over there. And symbolically, but really, we were actually closer to the black dorms than we were to the white dorms. And when you think about that, the gym was almost there, not quite, right?
Well, I've had a couple of experiences in my life that I connect together. One was I studied German in high school and college, and I've never been to Germany, and the only time that I ever used German, I was down in Frankfurt one time, and I got onto an elevator with a group of German tourists, and I started speaking with them in the very little German that I knew, and they asked me what part of Germany I was from. And I was just, wow, that's really cool.
Germantown.
But when you have that experience of kind of transitioning into a different, set of consciousness, that's happened to me on occasion when I'm with African American people, where I forget, oh, we got this distinction. This is the guy I'm playing ball with. He's on my team. The guy's on the other team. You forget about it. It's no longer the important thing. That's the place I want to be. That's the one place I want to be, where I don't think about that distinction. I look for other connections. Dustin, does that make sense to you when you're talking in terms of what you said earlier about looking at the positive part? That's how I interpret it.
Absolutely. I think, Stan may have mentioned that it's a lot of this is in our imagination, because we're talking to all Black people in one room. Yeah. It's a representation, and it's coming from all these different areas with all their own agendas and da 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 da. It's too much for our human brains. It just is. So the way I have dealt with it, because I have the same thing of like, I feel myself as not racist at all, but if I'm walking down the street and I'm going to find a strange Black person more threatening than a strange white person, usually younger or whatever, gang-bangy looking.
Yeah.
Social services now work in 99% Black communities, and you just get used to it, and that fear kind of goes away because fear has no substance.